For decades, a quiet assumption shaped how we thought about long-haul aviation, that Boeing would dominate wide-body aircraft forever. It wasn't arrogance. It was history. Boeing had written the rules of intercontinental travel, from the 747 that shrank the world in the 1970s to the 737 that redefined range and reliability in the 1990s. If you flew across an ocean, you were probably on a Boeing, but sometime in the last 20 years, something changed. Not loudly, not suddenly. There was no dramatic announcement, no corporate collapse, no scandal that shifted the balance. Instead, fleet by fleet, route by route, order by order, airlines around the world, including American carriers, began making a different choice. Today, if you board a wide-body aircraft for a long-haul flight, the odds are increasingly high that you're stepping onto an Airbus, and most passengers never noticed it happen. This is the story of how Airbus quietly won the wide-body war, not by building a better airplane, but by understanding what airlines actually needed. To understand what changed, you have to understand why Boeing's dominance once felt inevitable. For most of aviation history, Boeing didn't just build wide-body aircraft, it defined them. The 747 became the physical symbol of global connectivity, the queen of the skies, capable of carrying hundreds of passengers across oceans with a grace and presence no other aircraft could match. Airlines trusted Boeing because Boeing had earned that trust through decades of engineering excellence and operational reliability. Then came the 777, introduced in 1995. It became the backbone of long-haul aviation. It was powerful, efficient for its time, and dependable. Airlines like United, American, and Delta built their international networks around it. Boeing understood what airlines needed: range, capacity, and a proven track record. The 777 delivered all three. By the early 2000s, Boeing held nearly 70% of the wide-body market. It wasn't just dominance, it was institutional trust. When airlines planned their fleets for the next decade, they started with Boeing and worked backward. It made sense. Why risk a different manufacturer when Boeing had never let you down? But by the mid-2000s, something subtle was happening beneath the surface of the market. Airlines were changing, not their routes, not their branding, their economics. Fuel prices were becoming volatile and unpredictable. Long-haul demand was growing, but not uniformly. Some routes needed 300 seats, others needed 250, some needed maximum range, others needed flexibility. The old Boeing formula, build a powerful, high-capacity workhorse and let airlines figure out how to use it, was beginning to show its limitations. Airlines didn't just want performance anymore. They wanted options. They wanted efficiency. They wanted aircraft that could adapt to uncertainty. And Airbus had been quietly designing for exactly that. Airbus didn't try to beat Boeing at Boeing's game. They didn't build a bigger 747 or a longer range 777. Instead, they asked a different question. What if we designed wide-body aircraft around how airlines actually operate, not just how engineers want to build them? The answer was the A330. When it entered service in 1994, it looked unremarkable compared to Boeing's giants. It was smaller than the 777, less powerful than the 747, but it had something Boeing's wide-bodies didn't: operational flexibility. The A330 could fly transatlantic routes profitably with fewer passengers. It could serve secondary city pairs that didn't justify a 777. It burned less fuel per flight, which mattered more and more as oil prices climbed. More importantly, it shared a common type rating with the A320 family. That meant pilots certified on Airbus narrow-body aircraft could transition to the A330 with minimal additional training. For airlines, this wasn't a minor detail. It was a fundamental cost advantage. Crew scheduling became simpler. Training pipelines became more efficient. Fleet planning became more adaptable. Boeing had built aircraft for performance. Airbus had built aircraft for operations. And airlines noticed. Then came the A350, while Boeing spent years refining the 787 Dreamliner, a brilliant aircraft that suffered from painful development delays and production problems. Airbus moved decisively into the next generation of wide-body design. The A350 wasn't just efficient, it was right-sized for the modern long-haul market. It offered airlines three variants: the A350-900 for standard long-haul routes, the A350-1000 for higher capacity needs, and the ultra-long-range A350-900 ULR for routes like Singapore to New York. Each variant addressed a specific airline problem. The A350-900 became the perfect replacement for aging 777s and A330s on routes like Los Angeles to London or New York to Tokyo. The A350-1000 gave airlines a more efficient alternative to the larger 777-300ER and the A350-900 ULR opened routes that were previously impossible or marginally profitable. What made this strategy so effective wasn't technology alone, it was timing and positioning. Airbus offered airlines modern, fuel-efficient wide-bodies exactly when fuel costs and environmental pressures were forcing fleet renewal decisions. They offered flexibility exactly when demand uncertainty made airlines cautious about overbuying capacity. They offered commonality exactly when pilot shortages made crew management a critical constraint. Let's consider how this played out in the real world. Imagine you're a network planner at a major US airline in 2015. You're evaluating your transatlantic fleet. You have aging 767s that need replacement. You have 777s that are reliable but increasingly expensive to operate as fuel prices fluctuate. You're looking at new routes from secondary cities, places like Boston to Paris or Seattle to Amsterdam, where demand is strong but uncertain. The Boeing option is the 787 or a new 777X, both excellent aircraft, but the 787 has had well-publicized delays and production issues. The 777X won't be available for years. Meanwhile, Airbus is offering you A330neos and A350s that are available sooner, burn less fuel, and give you the flexibility to right-size your capacity across a range of routes. More importantly, if your airline already operates A320s on domestic routes, your pilots can transition to the A330 or A350 more easily than to a Boeing widebody. Your mechanics already understand Airbus systems. Your parts inventory can overlap. Your operational procedures can be standardized. This wasn't an emotional decision. It was ruthlessly practical. And airline after airline made the same calculation. Delta ordered A330neos and A350s. United added A350s to complement their Boeing fleet. American, long a Boeing loyalist, began exploring Airbus widebodies for specific route needs. International carriers like Singapore Airlines, Qatar Airways, and Cathay Pacific went heavily toward the A350 for their long-haul growth. Boeing, meanwhile, faced a different set of challenges. The company had bet heavily on the 787 Dreamliner as its next-generation widebody solution, and technically, the aircraft was brilliant. It introduced composite materials, advanced aerodynamics, and passenger comfort features that set new standards. But the development process was troubled. Delays mounted, production problems emerged. By the time the 787 was flying reliably, Airbus had already captured significant market share with the A330 and was preparing to launch the A350. Boeing's other widebody, the 777, was aging. The company announced the 777X as a replacement, a larger, more efficient evolution with folding wingtips and new engines. It promised to be an exceptional aircraft, but the timeline kept slipping. Certification delays, design changes, and the broader crisis surrounding the 737 MAX diverted resources and attention. Airlines that might have waited for the 777X instead turned to the A350, which was available, proven, and flying passengers profitably. None of this means Boeing built bad aircraft. The 787 is remarkable. The 777X will likely be excellent when it enters service. But in aviation, timing matters as much as technology. Airlines make fleet decisions years in advance based on delivery schedules, financing terms, and operational needs. When Boeing couldn't deliver on time, airlines couldn't wait. They had routes to open, passengers to carry, and shareholders to satisfy. Airbus filled that gap, not with flashy marketing or aggressive pricing alone, but with aircraft that were ready when airlines needed them, sized for how airlines wanted to use them, and integrated into fleets in ways that made operational sense. The result wasn't a sudden collapse in Boeing's wide-body market share. It was erosion, steady, persistent, almost invisible to anyone not watching the order books closely. In 2005, Boeing dominated wide-body orders. By 2015, Airbus had pulled even. By 2020, Airbus held a clear lead in both orders and deliveries for twin-aisle aircraft. Walk through any major international airport today, Atlanta, Los Angeles, Chicago, London, Dubai, and count the wide-bodies at the gates. You'll see A350s heading to Asia, A330s crossing the Atlantic, Boeing 777s and 787s are still there, still flying, still important. But the balance has shifted. Airbus isn't the underdog anymore. In wide-body aviation, they've become the standard. What makes this victory so interesting is how quiet it was. There were no triumphant press conferences, no public defeats. Boeing didn't fail catastrophically. They simply found themselves in a market that had moved while they were looking elsewhere. Airbus didn't need to destroy Boeing's reputation. They just needed to offer airlines a better answer to the problems they were actually facing. This teaches us something important about industrial competition and aviation specifically. Success isn't always about building the most impressive machine. It's about building the right machine at the right time for the right reasons. The A350 isn't more iconic than the 747. It isn't more revolutionary than the 787, but it's exactly what airlines needed when they needed it, and that turned out to matter more than anything else. Aviation is a conservative industry. Airlines don't make rash decisions. They don't switch manufacturers on a whim. When they do change, it's because the math, the operations, and the strategic logic all point the same direction. For wide-body aircraft, that logic increasingly pointed toward Airbus. Not because Boeing failed, but because Airbus understood the assignment better. So the next time you board a wide-body aircraft for a long-haul flight, look at the doorframe as you enter. Check the manufacturer. If it says Airbus, you're part of a shift that redefined modern aviation. If it says Boeing, you're flying on a legacy that still matters deeply. Either way, you're witnessing the outcome of one of the most consequential industrial competitions of the 21st century. And if you found this analysis valuable, if it gave you a new way to understand the aircraft you fly on and the decisions that shape modern aviation, consider subscribing to this channel. We create long-form documentaries that explore the systems, strategies, and quiet turning points that define the aviation industry. Share your thoughts in the comments. Tell us about your experiences on wide-body aircraft or what aviation stories you'd like us to explore next. Because the best stories in aviation aren't always the loudest ones. Sometimes they're the ones that happen slowly, deliberately, almost invisibly, until one day you look up and realize the entire industry has changed. That's what happened with wide-body aircraft. Airbus didn't just win market share, they won the future, and they did it so quietly that most of the world never noticed until it was already done.